when they actually don't
Okay,
move.
so we've been joined by Peter George from the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries. Have I got that right, Mr. George?
You have.
Sometimes people use different, someone else's login. So I understand parliamentary privilege information about your own evidence and the protection of witnesses has been provided to you. I'd now like to invite you for the Hansard record to state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today.
My full name is Peter George, and I'm here as the legal advisor to the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries.
Thank you, Mr. George. I'd now invite you to make a short opening statement, and once you finish those remarks, I will invite members of the committee to ask you questions.
Senator Pratt, because you might not have full vision, I just let
There's
you
a witness in the room as well.
We have two, in
Thank
fact,
you.
Senator Pratt. So we've got Mr. Tony Webber and Mr. Tony McDonald.
Mr. Webber and Mr. McDonald, welcome. One of you might indeed be providing the opening statement, but I'll now ask you to introduce yourselves to the committee and invite the most appropriate person as delegated by yourselves to give that opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Tony Webber, the Chief Executive of the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, and I'm joined by...
Tony McDonald, the Director of Industry Operations at the FCAI.
And I will make a short introduction for you, Senator.
Thank you.
The level of dealer terminations in Australia over the last 4.5 years to the beginning of 2020 has run at 0.33% per annum. If a dealer is wrongfully terminated, then they're entitled to compensation under the existing extensive legal regime. It should be noted that non-renewal is not termination. The historic low level of terminations is not surprising, as cooperation and harmony between the dealer and the OEM is key to business success. The avenue to the customer for the OEM is through the dealer. However, the automotive world is not free from risk. A combination of factors including tightening of lending following the Banking Royal Commission, COVID-19, natural disasters, supply constraints have impacted sales in Australia. In 2017, the industry sold just over 1.189 million units. This year, it's on target to sell around 860,000 units, a decline of more than 25%. We've seen the market decline on a month-by-month comparison over the previous year and for 31 consecutive months now. Times are tough. However, this is part and parcel of being an entrepreneur. There is a degree of risk, and there is certainly a degree of reward for a well-run business. Importantly, this cannot be assessed at the end of the term. The risk is reduced by industry experience as almost an essential prerequisite to establishing a new dealership. The disclosure document advises dealers to access quality legal, accounting and business advice prior to signing. Dealers and OEMs are protected by the extensive regulation in this area, including the Franchising Code, including the recent changes introduced on the 1st of June this year, and good faith provisions. The Australian Consumer Law, which includes unconscionable conduct provisions, and the common law. The world is changing rapidly. Consumers are changing, and the regulations that govern OEM and dealer relations need to have the flexibility to provide vehicles to the market and service those vehicles in the manners that consumers desire. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks, and I will now ask Senator O'Neill if she'd like to kick off the questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for your opening statement, Mr. Webber and Mr. McDonald, and to you too, Mr. George. Can you please tell the committee if Honda Australia are a member of your board?
There is a representative from Honda Australia on our board, yes, Senator.
Thank you. Are you aware that Honda Australia distributed over $38 million in profits to their equity holders located outside of Australia in the last financial year?
No.
Can you please tell the committee if Mercedes-Benz are a member of your board?
There is a representative from Mercedes-Benz on our board at the moment, Senator.
Are you aware that Mercedes-Benz Australia paid $100 million in dividends to shareholders last financial year?
No.
Is General Motors Holden a member of the FCAI?
Yes.
Do you represent any car manufacturers that make cars in Australia from scratch?
Today, we have in the past, but we don't anymore since the last plant closed at the end of 2017.
So there are no Australian car manufacturers as part of the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries. You only represent overseas car manufacturers who import into Australia. or
That's
export
not
into
quite
Australia.
right. We represent brands that distribute vehicles in Australia, and sometimes those brands are the Australian arms of international corporations, and other times they are brands that have a relationship with a supplier of vehicles and bring those vehicles to the market in Australia.
But there are no manufacturers in Australia that you represent.
There are no manufacturers of vehicles in Australia.
Does the FCAI have any car dealers on your board? Do you have any car dealers on your board?
No, we do not represent car dealers. Our constitution would not allow that.
And do you have any other representatives who represent anyone other than car manufacturers on your board?
We have representatives that represent the sellers of ATVs and motorcycles in this country.
So other than car manufacturers, that is the full extent of who you represent?
Our current membership is people who import and sell vehicles in Australia from the motorcycle, ATV and light vehicle sector, yes.
Is it fair to say that the FCAI advocates on behalf of car manufacturers and their interests?
Well, the importers of motor vehicles, motorcycles and ATVs, yes.
You're reframing my question. Can I just ask to get a very clear answer? Is it fair to say that FCAI advocates on behalf of car manufacturers and car manufacturers' interests?
We represent the distributors of cars in this country and motorcycles and ATVs, Senator.
Distributors are not car dealers, is that right, Mr Webber?
Correct.
So
Well, sorry. We're getting in a very technical area here. I
don't know that it's that technical.
Well,
the reality is that there's big companies that we've been hearing about all morning from every witness so far who are displaying extraordinary behaviours that we just had reported, and I note that you were in the room for the witnesses who just preceded you. Honda having employed Deloitte to intimidate, according to our evidence this morning, to intimidate Australian businesses in this country. I'm trying to make it clear on the public record, are you here to support the Australian businesses, or are you here effectively advocating for the car manufacturers?
I'm simply making the point that some of our members, number one...
Mr Webber, you can make that point, but I want an answer to my question.
Well, some of our members actually historically have had dealerships, to answer your question, and I believe that they still do, but I will stand corrected if I'm wrong on that.
Mr Webber, I don't think it's such a hard question. The AADA are here clearly standing up for Australian businesses. Are you here clearly standing up for the manufacturers of cars who are overseas entities? Which side are you on, Mr Webber?
I represent our members. Our members are clearly stated on our website, and...
Are you too embarrassed to say that you represent Honda? You've told me they're on your board.
No, not at all, Senator.
You're not embarrassed to represent Mercedes-Benz, who are also in the throes of delivering very significant change to the Australian dealership network?
Not at all, Senator.
Okay, well, I think it's pretty clear who you're here to represent. Is it safe to say, given that then, that you wouldn't want any of the proposed regulations that have been asked for by the sector to be implemented? Would you prefer it to stay as it is without any legislative change?
Well, we've been through a substantial review of the regulatory framework around franchising.
That's correct, Mr Webber.
That was last updated on the 1st of June by an announcement by the government.
Yes.
Those changes need to work their way through the system, given the nature of such changes.
So,
and
Mr.
that's
Webber,
similar to all sectors of the economy. Sorry,
Thank you. But you weren't here this morning for the evidence, although I'm sure that you will read the transcript from the AADA, who made it very clear that the instrument that you're talking about, which was a government response in June, does not meet the needs of the sector and is not delivering any of the relief from a power play by big companies such as GM, Honda and Mercedes to alter the model of doing business in Australia?
Well, the announcement was made on the 1st of June. I would be surprised if anyone was in a position to make any substantial assessment of the success of those changes so quickly after the announcement.
Are you aware of the failure of previous attempts by the government in recent years to make change that has not delivered the sort of protection of Australian small business that the AAD are seeking?
In my sector or more broadly across the economy?
In the AADA? In your sector?
Well, as I stated at the start, the level of terminations in Australia over many years has been very low. We looked at the last 4.5 years to the beginning of 2020. It ran at 1/3 of 1% per annum.
And
that would strike me as very low level of termination.
Mr Webber, you made the point yourself that it wasn't just about termination. There was also the issue of non-renewal, and we just had evidence about 11 out of 14 Honda dealers receiving a termination. I think it's arbitrary selection of data to the beginning of 2020, which doesn't capture what's really going on, but we might disagree on that. If I can ask a final question. In your submission, you state that the imbalance of power argument, which we've heard so much of this morning from the US, from the AADA, from the most successful Honda dealer in Melbourne whose contract was terminated, that you describe it, the imbalance of power, as a catchphrase, not a reality. You say it's an unsophisticated analysis of the dealer and distribution participants. How would you describe the power relation between some of the biggest companies in the world and these sophisticated but relatively small businesses that provide cars and jobs and give people the benefit of profit making in small business in Australia?
I think the vast majority of dealers in Australia are very sophisticated. They have access to quality advice, whether it be legal, taxation or business advice. Sometimes they have that in-house, Senator. We also have a very extensive legal framework to protect these people. And if there are issues, they can take it to the courts. And my understanding, and Mr George will be able to give you a much better answer to this question, but my understanding is that there is an affordable process through the courts if there is a disagreement.
I might ask you to provide evidence to that fact, because it's an assertion that doesn't seem to be borne out by other submissions that we've received in confidence, and the evidence from Mr Avis and Mr Klein with regard to their battle with Astoria, in which Deloitte have represented Honda in a manner that I think reveals the underbelly of the way power operates in this sector. Finally, could I just ask, with regard to the draft principles for new car dealership agreements that the Department of Industry is drafting for Minister Karen Andrews, did you have any input into these drafting principles for the department, Mr Webber, Mr McDonald or Mr George?
Senator, we've been working with the department, the Minister's office and the Minister over a number of years.
Well, I'm sure that you would have been, but I'm asking specifically with regard to these draft principles.
Well, we were emailed draft principles yesterday. I received them. I was in a number of meetings yesterday. I looked at them late last night. I haven't checked them against work that we've done in the past. We've been talking at a whole raft of levels with the Minister's office, the Minister and the department for a long period of time, and there have been many suggestions throughout that time.
Mr Webber, I caution you to respond along the lines that you are doing at the moment. The answer I seek is a full and frank answer. The draft principles were sent to you yesterday. You have had a chance to look at them. I do not dispute the fact that you have been very much in the ear of the Minister. The question I ask is, with regard to the 6 principles that are in front of you and which you have had time to look, did you provide any input into the drafting of these particular principles? If you can't answer, can you refer to Mr McDonald or Mr George, or if you need to, take it on notice?
Well, Senator, we've been having extensive discussions about the framework, and any draft principles would be part of that framework. And we have been very upfront about what we believe is the right approach, and we believe that there is an appropriate regulatory framework that has been enhanced by the changes that were announced.
Mr Webber, you're answering another question of your own choosing. I want to ask you again, and I want a clear answer if I can this time. Did you have any input into the draft principles, item 1 to 6, that you have a copy of in front of you? Did you have any input into the drafting of these principles that have been released now by the department?
Senator, perhaps one of the problems here is that we did get these rather late, this document yesterday. I have not compared the document that was provided to us with what we were working on. Did you know where the one that the committee provided to us came from? Because I haven't had a chance, Senator, I apologise, happy to do it after this, but to compare what we thought were the status of the document with what was sent to us yesterday.
Right, so it was pretty clear for other participants to indicate whether they were involved with the draft principles or not. Given that you represent the OEMs,
yep.
I thought it would be reasonable that you might have been consulted. Is there evidence to me that the Minister has not made available to you the opportunity to participate in these principles? Is the Minister just playing one game with the small
Senator.
businesses in this country and playing another game with you as representatives of the overseas companies?
That's not what I was trying to convey.
Well, I'm
Senator,
sure it
and I
wasn't, but the reality is I
apologise.
can't get a straight answer. Is the Minister
Senator,
in good faith negotiating with you around these draft principles, or is this a folly that she's trying to keep the car dealers quiet with?
Senator, what we're saying is, yes, the Minister is negotiating with the industry, including the dealers and the distributors through the associations, about draft principles. I'm sorry, but I have not compared the document that was sent to us from the Senate yesterday, of which the origin I don't know, with the status of the document that I do know we were working with the department and the industry. I don't know if they're the same document.
Thank you, Mr
That's all
McDonald.
I'm
That's
saying.
a much clearer
Good,
answer to the
pleased to help.
question. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator O'Neill. Are there other questions from other senators?
No questions.
Thank you. So I've just got one point of clarification. So if you can please take on notice comparing the questions that Senator O'Neill asked. I'm assuming that you are, we'll go back and check whether Senators, whether you have been consulted about the draft voluntary principles for new car dealership agreements.
Yep.
That's correct?
Yep, we'll certainly take on board that comparison, Senator.
Thank you.
And you will take that on notice?
Yep.
I'm unaware of at which point the committee's version of that document is an earlier or later iteration to which you might you might also reflect on. So you might also note that as well. Thank you very much for your evidence today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.